I always knew my work hat had to go on first before my skates. That was one thing that I knew for a fact. And you can never be under over prepared.
That was two-time Stanley Cup champion Brian Skrudland, and you are listening to episode 141 of the Up My Hockey podcast with Jason Podolin. Just watch me now. Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Podolin, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hello there, and welcome back, or welcome to the Up My Hockey podcast for episode 141. And today we are speaking with Brian Skrudland. For some of you older listeners, you should know the name Brian Skrudland. And for some of you younger listeners, I am going to set the table here a little bit. I usually don't go down the stat line for my guests, but I will for Screwy, just because he is a name that, like, again, if you are a hockey fan in the 80s, 90s, you will probably recognize him, but he wasn't a star necessarily. He wasn't somebody that made all-star teams. He never scored more than 15 goals in an NHL season, but he was the core of many teams. He was a guy that wore an A or a C on NHL teams. And he was the captain of the Florida Panthers when I was a part of that organization. And Screwy was a great embodiment of what a captain is. And we do talk leadership a lot on this upcoming conversation that you're going to listen to. But, Brian was a hard-working guy, born in Peace River, Alberta, but I guess was raised in Saskatchewan, played for the Saskatoon Blades, and wasn't drafted. He wasn't drafted in the NHL, although he said that he thought he was supposed to be or should have been. He was told that he was going to, never got drafted, got passed over, used that as a chip on his shoulder. And from that point on, ended up turning into, I can't even count the seasons, but 881 games. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Wow, like a lot of seasons. Played for the Montreal Canadiens, played for the Calgary Flames, the Florida Panthers, the New York Rangers, and the Dallas Stars, winning 2 Stanley Cups. One in his very first season with Montreal against the Calgary Flames, where he scored the overtime winner in a Stanley Cup final game, 9 seconds in, which is still the standing record for fastest overtime goal scored, and one with the Dallas Stars at the end of his career. And again, like I said, went to the Stanley Cup finals twice, and not won, and didn't win, once with Montreal and once with the Florida Panthers. And and having Screwy on is really an honor for me, being able to formally interview a former captain of mine, and to be able to ask some poignant, in-depth questions about leadership and about him and how he went about his day and his role, and how he provided value to the teams that he played on. And this guy, like Brian Skrudland, anyone who knows him or played with him, he was fun to be around, just plain and simple. But he was fun to be around in all the right ways, meaning like his sense of humor was on point. But it was not in a degrading or demeaning way. It wasn't in a cynical way. He rallied the troops all the time. He wanted the guys to do things together, and he always showed up to work. And I think that there is a quote that he uses in this discussion that he says he always knew he put his hard hat on before he put on his skates. Like, that came first, that he knew that he was going to work that day, whether it was practice or whether it was a game. And that was totally true. But the thing was, he brought that same level of attitude, like a good attitude, a good, positive, energetic, enthusiastic attitude to the work and to the competitiveness, and had a great time while doing it. And I think that there can be a marriage there between working hard, something that is difficult, something that may hurt, and having fun and doing it with a smile on your face, competing in practice against your teammates in a way that makes them better and is serious in nature, because the battle is serious, but there's also fun at the end of the set and at the end of the rep. I thought that he embodied that absolutely perfectly. He was a workmanlike guy. You know, he had 94 points in junior. I mean, this guy could score. But as he says in this interview, I mean, at the NHL level, you have to fill different roles. And there are guys that are potentially going to be better than you at certain things. And he found that niche, you know, to play as long as he did, to be a winner, to be valued as a winner, to understand what it took, and to really embrace the idea of effort and character, and made a career out of it, you know, quite simply. And once you see that, once you witness that, as an onlooker, and that's kind of what I was with Florida. You know, I was never really a part of that team. I was the year after the Cup when he was there, and played my 19 games there, and was around them, and was around him for, you know, multiple training camps, and got to see how he operated during that Stanley Cup run. But I wasn't a part of the team. I wouldn't consider myself, you know, a part of that whole thing. And it was me as a bystander, kind of watching and taking it all in, and not knowing at the time how brilliant he really was at the leadership role. How he was so gifted at making that room feel together, have a laugh together as a group, making events mandatory as the group, making the bus trips, the flights, enjoyable experiences. He had a gift for doing that, and yet he would be the first one on the ice and the hardest one working on the bike, or, you know, in the skate or whatever it was, and he always brought it. He just always brought that level and that standard, and that was such a great standard to set, and I think it was infectious for those guys who played with him, and just the levity in the room that he brought made it a more enjoyable experience. And those are two lessons right there before we even get into the discussion that I hope sits with you who are listening right now, especially if you're a player. Being somebody in the locker room that can bring people together and that can make it fun is a gift. It is a skill. It is something that makes you valuable. And it also is something that makes you respected, quite honestly. But the beauty is that to be that player in the room and to get the respect of the guys to follow you, like to a restaurant or to some social engagement, or whatever the case may be, you also have to be somebody on the ice that they respect. And you have to have a standard when it comes to what it is that you're doing. And that's where Brian Skrudland brought that. So your personal standards when it comes to your effort and your preparation and your compete and your desire to win, those aren't faked, right? Those are something that you arrive with, that you have intention about, that you can create a standard for. And when you bring that, you now have a layer of street cred in the locker room that you can be a guy that is now able to joke. Like, if the hardest working guy on the ice, who is one of the most competitive guys, can also cut a few jokes in the room and make guys laugh and add some level of humor and enjoyment to things, that really opens up the opportunity for other guys to be themselves, to realize that not everybody has to be serious necessarily, or that there is required a level of enjoyment for the game to be, you know, fun and something that we look forward to coming to the rink. And Brian really, really did that. And it's not an accident that he won. I mean, he won a Calder Cup as the captain, as a second-year pro, the captain of a team in Sherbrooke with the Canadians. He won the Calder Cup, followed by a Stanley Cup the year after. Like, he talks about a crazy 2 years. What a start to pro hockey. And then to finish his career off with another Stanley Cup with Dallas. Just a phenomenal career. You know, 881 games at the end of the day. That was through a couple lockouts and through a couple strikes. You know, he would have made 1,000 games if the league would have ran, fluently and consistently, and had 124 goals, 219 assists for 343 points. So, like I said, very, very respectable numbers, especially with the games played. But from the point standpoint, respectable numbers, but not a star. Just a guy that kept showing up and kept getting the job done and embraced his role and made an awesome career out of it. But the other thing that stands out is the 164 playoff games, right? 164 playoff games with 61 points. Was able to elevate his game when it mattered, and was able to be a part of some amazing, amazing championships and some amazing memories. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Screwy is super entertaining. He has some great stories. He tells a few from back in the Florida days, and I know I got to chuckle a few times. This guy's a funny man, and I think you can imagine him in his 20s and 30s. How he would control a dressing room and how he would bring the level of joy up in an environment like that. So without further ado, I bring you two-time Stanley Cup champion, one-time Calder Cup champion, and former captain of the Florida Panthers, Mr. Brian Skrudland. All right, here we are with my former captain for episode 141. Pleasure to have you on, Mr. Brian Skrudland.
Wonderful to join you, Jason. It's been a while, and I've been looking forward to this since you contacted me. So,
yeah, but it's a pleasure, absolute honor. It has been a long time. My gosh, I was just trying to look at that, and I mean, 96. Wow. Well, I mean, we crossed paths before that in camp, and then actually became teammates in 96. So, I mean, that's a heck of a long time ago, and we have Terry Ryan to thank for putting us together, because I saw you on his podcast and he passed along your number. So thanks so much for wanting to come on and do this. Appreciate it.
Awesome. My pleasure.
I want to go back. I mean, there's so many places to start. I mean, part of what we do here on this podcast is, celebrate the careers of players, right? And the ups and downs and the highs and lows of that. I find that the adversity and the challenges is really usually the identifying pieces of that make the player, so I do like digging into that more than necessarily the highlights. But I think it's pretty wild with you to be like your second year of being a pro, you win a championship, and your third one followed up with another championship in the biggest cup you could ever win. Can you take us back to that time, 83, 84? Coming out of the WHL, what was that transition like, from being a junior at that time in that era to becoming a pro?
Well, first of all, a real disappointment for not being drafted. I did have a couple of really good years, and so that was that was one of those challenges for me to start with, that I not only my skating, but now I had challenges to even get there. So it was,
right.
And we had some really good junior hockey teams. I think winning is what it's all about, and people, you really draw a lot of attention when you're a winner, and never had that opportunity. Well, had lots of opportunity, but never got over the finish line with that side of it until my second year in the minors with the Sherbrooke Canadians, and man, everything I've heard, like once you win, you just want more of it, and that's exactly what happened. And if you could imagine, I mean, we were on top of the world winning that American Hockey League championship, which is a pretty hard trophy to win. And the next year, boy, there was 7, 8 of us that went up from Sherbrooke into Montreal, and then to carry that cup on May 24th of 1986. That was the biggest thrill of my life. Well, I shouldn't say that in case my wife watches this podcast, because we did get married in between championships. So that was a pretty good 2 years, let me tell you.
Wow, that's crazy. Well, yeah, well, I didn't realize that. So I didn't do the homework on that. I saw that you had 94 points as a Blade there, and it was in 71 games, which was a hell of a season, with the Saskatoon Blades. What year was your draft year? Do you remember what year that was?
That would have been 1981.
81. So in 81, 18, 42 points, didn't get drafted. Could have got drafted 81. The next year, didn't get drafted. So you got passed over twice at that era. Like so let's talk about that, because there's players that are going through that right now, right? And there's a lot of guys pack up their bags and say, you know what, it's not for me. I guess I'm not good enough. What was your mentality with that at that time?
Well, I had an opportunity with the Canadian Olympic team. And so that whole summer was training and 3 different tryouts, Winnipeg, and then the next tryouts in Calgary. And I was one of the last cuts. But in the Winnipeg tryout, Del Wilson, who was a scout for the Montreal Canadiens, came to see me. He had a contract in his hand, showed it to me. We sat, we had a coffee. He showed it to me. He says, "Now, we want you to make the Canadian Olympic team, but we also would like you to respect the fact that we have a contract here for you. And Brian, if it doesn't work out, we'd really like you to become a Montreal Canadian." Everybody that was on my team, friends, family, coaches, GMs, and etc., were going, "Well, you're the furthest thing from a flying Frenchman in the entire world, so we're not quite sure about the Canadians." However, man, that made me feel good, and it just took a little bit of something off, because I did have, when I was cut from the Canadian Olympic team before they went over to Europe, I did have 4 other teams contact me for tryouts. One other had a contract, but to be honest, I was a Habs fan when I was a kid, so this was the start of a real dream come true.
Right.
And I just knew the organization, who was in charge. I knew they were turning over a bunch of Leafs. The older guys were on their way out, and so there was going to be some room if a guy could make it. And I was pretty proud of Doug Wickenheiser out of Regina that was there, which was quite an inspiration. And even though Doug had a little bit of a hard time to start with, I did have a training camp with him, and just some wonderful memories of my first couple of years there. And of course, when you win your first year in the National Hockey League, you never forget it, and never forget those teammates as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, from a personal standpoint, the the disappointment of not hearing your name called in the draft, and the coverage then, even the coverage for mine, is way different than it is now. I mean, so the eras
Yeah.
were different. I mean, so I don't know what the expectation was, if there was a draft list, if you thought you were going to go and then you didn't. Like what
Yeah,
was
I
what was
did.
the
I
message
was told.
to you,
I
or
was
the
told if I was available in the second round, Jason, that I was going to the Boston Bruins, and then all of a sudden that second round comes around, third round, fourth round, and I just it just never came to fruition. So very disappointing. I at one point in time thought, man alive, I've really got to bust my ass and make this Canadian Olympic team, because this was the only thing I wanted my whole life, was to become a professional hockey player, and I was going to make that dream come true, and thank God it happened.
right? So that was like you kind of doubled down on it. It wasn't, there was the moment of disappointment. You let yourself feel that, but then you realize that, well, pitter patter, let's get at her, right? Like
Yeah.
obviously, I need to do a little more to make this happen.
Well, and number one was my skating, so I got to really work on that, and that was the biggest thing. Now, once I had made that decision to become a Montreal Canadian, and I got to training camp. Um, a wonderful experience that was, but I knew I wasn't ready. I just like, no, thank you. I'm not ready. Let's get to Halifax and let's get this thing going. Well, I got to Halifax, and we had a bunch of old veterans there, and they weren't very happy that I was one of the last guys sent down. So when it came to initiation day, I was glad that about 4 of them got picked up in the expansion draft that year, and 4 real big, old, tough guys. Jeff Brubaker, Dwight Schofield, and for some reason they really never liked this kid from Saskatchewan. So anyway, I persevered. We had John Brophy as a coach. Couldn't ask for a better coach at that point in time. He
Yeah,
was just exactly what I needed with our group. But Andre Boudreau was there. Andre spent a lot of time working on my skating with me. As time went on, so did Jacques Lemaire in Montreal, and so I really felt like I definitely had a different style of skating, but I
yeah,
felt like I could get to A and B as quick as anybody. So
yeah.
that confidence part of it was really built up within the organization.
And so when you talk about that, because there's multiple athletes right now, hockey players. Skating has always been important, but I think now it's more important than ever. Essentially, they say you can't skate, you can't play right now.
Yeah, right.
Um, what did you do? So I mean, as a 20-year-old player now, knowing that you still had to work on your skating, what was that like at that time? What were you doing?
Well, Claude Durrell, coach for the Montreal Canadiens for years, a legend. I went in there in the summertime, and Claude, his favorite word to me was, okay, Westerner, jump, 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 jump. So I jumped, and I jumped a lot, let me tell you. But it was really just getting that, and leg strength. That was the one thing that we really worked on in the gym. I wasn't much for Jim. To me, was spelled Jim. It was a friend of mine or something, not Gym. And I probably spend more time in the gym today than I ever have. So,
Yeah.
that health is so important. And but getting there, I just had the greatest support, and I haven't even mentioned my family support yet. With all these coaches and everything else, was phenomenal. Not to even mention the family.
Yeah, definitely need a support cast for sure to get
Yeah,
anywhere, and a good one at that. But one of the things I work on with the guys that I'm working with is like the ability, which I think is a skill of being able to raise your hand and ask for some help in some areas, or at least ask what I can do.
yeah,
I know for me that was one thing that I wasn't great at,
yeah.
asking those questions that could benefit you and kind of feel like you're the lone soldier. Anyone that seems to have had any level of like real success, there's a team around them in some capacity, you know?
Yes.
So those coaches that wanted to work with you, was that them, whatever, kind of feeling like, I want to take this kid under their wing? Did you make yourself available for that to happen, or how did that interpersonal relationship happen?
I was 24/7 available for those guys. They were going to help me make my dream come true. And, both of them, Andre Boudria and Jacques Lemaire, both had wonderful careers. And both of them were really good skaters. So I got a chance to listen to every word they said. Claude Durrell was just a bonus on top of that. And he got us ready for the preseason, which, to be honest, back in our day when I first started, if you spent a little bit of time in the off season training, you went in with a leg up on the older guys, because really that training camp was for getting into shape and
Yeah.
getting back. And a lot of guys. I mean, I'll never forget my first camp. A fellow by the name of Guy Lafleur was going to be my right winger, and he came up to me and beforehand, before the very first skate, and he says, "Brian, welcome aboard." He says, "I hear you're my center Heisman." He says, "You put the puck on my tape, I get you to assist. You put the puck over here, go get it again, bring it back, put it on my tape, I get you to assist." I hit him in the head, I think, or shoulder with my first pass. In the ass with my second pass, and then that was it. I had no longer had Guy Lafleur as a right winger, so it was learned by learning fairly quick. But those guys, they really never skated in the summertime, and
Right.
so that was a leg up for us to maybe impress the brass right off the hop.
Yeah. Well, you got to do what you got to do, right? And I mean, and it just seems like everyone's in this day and age, everyone's looking for that extra edge now. And it's,
Yeah,
if you're not in shape, you're done, right? You have to
yeah,
show up
yeah.
in shape.
Well, when
And
you first started, were we two a days in training camp,
oh
or you
god,
just
yeah,
one a day? Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
That was Roger
Yeah, we
Nielsen
still
when I was there. So that was like when the 20-mile bike or the 10-mile run or whatever we had to do. Remember, like all that stuff. Like it was pretty legit.
crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. My fondest memory of our very first training camp down there, maybe not first, because Steve Washburn and you the same year,
1 year before me.
1 year before you. So
Yeah.
Steve came to camp, wonderful shape, great hockey player. And after our first session, he went out in the sun and fell asleep and burnt himself so bad that he couldn't get his hockey gear on. So they sent him home. I felt so bad for the kid, because I think you truly had a chance.
Right.
Anyway, it was quite an experience. That was another one of those experiences of playing in the sun that we all got to sort of enjoy or not enjoy for that year, those few years.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That was a wild place to be a
Sure
first
was.
year pro, and especially in that run that you guys went to, which I'm like, we'll get to that for sure. Just going to take a short break from my conversation with Brian Skrudland to give a shout out to my friends at Elite Prospects. Elite Prospects is the gateway to hockey. Online since 1999, eliteprospects.com is the #1 statistical hockey resource, serving over 1 million unique visitors weekly. It offers the most informative hockey database on the web and has the most reliable transaction tracker available. And for youth hockey players, EP is your very own online showcase to highlight your achievements and help secure future playing opportunities. Coaches, scouts, and schools at every level of the game consider Elite Prospects their one-stop shop to discover future stars. Hockey fan crazy about the NHL, the draft, and your team's top prospects? There's no better source than EP Rinkside, providing insight and analysis on players worldwide through written features, video breakdowns, interviews, and more. Head to eliteprospects.com now and experience your gateway to hockey. Now let's get back to our conversation with Brian Skrudland. So you guys switched from Nova Scotia to Sherbrooke. Sherbrooke, like you said, you had, a winning team, and you talked about the idea of winning. And once you get the taste of winning, like you learn how to do it, which I think is super important. You understand the feeling of it, but it also attracts other people that want you to be a part of things, and I think that's establishes you right off the bat. How did that team come together, and what role did you play on it, and what did you learn from that season?
Well, I was the captain of that team, so it was
The
my
Sherbrooke
second
team?
year. Yeah,
They made you captain the second year pro.
I was, and what an honor that was, being chosen by teammates. We were mixed with Winnipeg at the time, Montreal, Winnipeg. So I think Winnipeg only had about 7 or 8 players on the roster. Montreal had the majority of the players, but we had a pretty tough season. I mean, all season long, it was we had some injury bugs, we had some goaltending problems, we had just some things that went down. But once again, coaching. Pierre Kramer was our head coach. Jean Hamel was our assistant coach. Jean Hamel had just lost his eye the year before, 2 years before, in the great big Quebec Montreal Battle of Quebec. And so Jean, as an assistant coach, put his gear on every day. Now, this was a man of 30, what was Jean be at that time? 34, 35, but one of the greatest shape athletes that you've ever met.
Yeah.
So when he came to practice for real. And now we were, I mean, not to say that Ted Fawcett, 6'4", 220 pounds, wasn't a big guy, but he was also 21 years of age, or, he wasn't 35 man strength.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting for Jean to be able to do that all season long. And then at the end of the year, we had a couple injuries, goalies get injured, and a fellow by the name of Patrick Roy happened to join us. His junior team lost out, as did another fellow, right winger Stéphane Richer, as did another left winger, Jean Cordic, or right winger with Portland. So all of a sudden we had all these young guys coming in, nice influx, a little bit of team depth, and Patrick stood on his head. And next thing you know, there we were in the Calder Cup finals. Wasn't expected. I think we snuck into the last spot to make it 2-3 days before the final game of the season is when we solidified our playoff spot. So yeah, we really did get hot, and we went on a run, and Sherbrooke was great for that. We had, leaving Halifax, I got to tell you, it was really disappointing for a lot of us, because we did fall in love with the Maritimes. When I arrived in Halifax, to be honest with you, Jason, I said, okay. And this is my first time away from home, because I played junior hockey in Saskatoon, where I grew up. And so now I'm on my own, and I'm in Halifax, and I was only there for 4 days. And I said, okay, if I don't move to Dartmouth, I'm going to end up being the world's best bartender. So yeah, I got my ass over to Dartmouth, and took the ferry every day, told the boys I couldn't stay after the game because I got to catch the 11 o'clock ferry. And and I didn't tell them that I bought a 75 Ford Pinto station wagon with wood paneling. But one day I was crossing the McKay Bridge, and sure as shit, one of my teammates went by me, give me a honk. What the heck? So I got to the rig with Screwy. You got an old Pinto? I said, no, I was just borrowing it. I didn't want to get in any extras curriculars after games or practices. So I usually got my way home. But
about that mature decision, like to experience the 4 days in Halifax. And anyone who's been to Halifax knows the Maritimes, and the people in the Maritimes, they love to have a good time. There's never a dull moment. And what a great place, really, to be 20 or 21 years old and playing pro hockey. But you're like, hey, I think this is clashing with my idea of becoming a pro hockey player, and I'm going to move away. So I have an excuse that I don't have to be partying. Like, just walk me through that. Like, that must have been a pretty big decision for you.
Well, it was, and when I left, I really had full blinders on that, hey, this is all about hockey, and I want this to be my career, and even back then, you looked at it financially, it was going to be a big boost, and all that stuff. Just, I mean, the notoriety of playing in the National Hockey League, the idea of making some decent money. I mean, this is a kid's dream come true. Today, I don't know what the heck they call it because that's real money.
Yeah.
But it was real. I had a couple other young guys that were moving in with one another. I didn't want that scenario because I didn't want to be babysitting, and I didn't want to be, feeling like I had, to take care of somebody because I
Yeah.
knew I was going to take good care of myself. But then I thought, wow, I'll just look over into Dartmouth, and I spoke with a couple of the older guys as well that I really liked on our team. Dave Allison being one of them, and Redsy said, "Oh gosh, there's a million places over there, Screwy, and you find something real cheap, and I think it's probably a great decision for you." So anyway, I had great support again from teammates, but I really, I after my first couple of days in Halifax, I thought, wow, Privateers is a pretty fun spot in the upper and lower deck, and I was getting to know them all. It just was a ritual. That's what you did after practice, right? You went with
Yeah.
the guys, and I always did. I didn't stop going with the guys. It was just, hey, I got to get home on the ferry. So,
Right. Right.
I had a pretty good reason or excuse to get out of there and and do what I really wanted to do, which was just focus on hockey.
Right. Yeah. And so you mentioned as a second year pro to get voted by your teammates as the captain. I'm glad you brought that up because I had no idea. I knew you were my captain, with Florida, and I knew that you were recognized as a leader in the NHL. But I mean, that's a huge
Yeah.
honor and what a compliment, and walk me through, like, what about you do you think, obviously you have to guess, but what about you do you think made you captain worthy as a second year pro in the eyes of a lot of these guys that were much older than you?
We had we actually made it into the second round of the playoffs that year in Halifax and played a team from Maine, older guys. I think that was a real good challenge for us. And geez, my game just kept getting elevated and elevated, and of course, when that happens, you get put into positions to win and or succeed, and maybe even more challenges than were expected at that point in time in my career. But um, I surpassed a couple of teammates that were goal scorers, but they weren't scoring goals, and I was scoring goals, and I was still doing the other side of the puck as well. So I think you gained a lot of confidence through the coaches, and so then off to Sherbrooke, and we had a lot of veteran guys that were either picked up in an expansion draft or waiver draft at that point in time. So we had a fairly young team, and when it started, I don't know. I guess I was probably one of those vocal guys. Definitely had the guys over to the chalet a couple of times. Mike Lawler and I rented a chalet on a small little lake just outside of Sherbrooke, Quebec. Say once again, not to stay in town to get into trouble.
Yeah.
So that was kind of good, and bought ourselves a skidoo, and we had the boys out there all the time. So it was a lot of fun. But
All right.
those experiences. The idea of my game getting better, I think that just built confidence in me and the people around me. So that gave me an opportunity to get that C on my jersey. And of course, then winning with that C on your jersey. And the Canadians hadn't had any hardware since 1979. Serge Savard is only a 2-hour drive away. He never missed a home game, let alone did he not come on the road with us, which was incredible for all of our team.
Right.
And I mean, just showing the support. So when we won that year, Jason, I was the captain. The game's over. We're going to the party. The captain takes the trophy. Well, as Serge said to me, wherever the trophy goes, Serge goes. So he says, I guess we're hanging together. So it was kind of funny because as we're driving to the function afterwards, he said, by the way, you come into camp next year in great shape and you're ready to go, and I can almost guarantee your roster spot. And he said that to a couple of people, and sure as heck, there's a man of his word. We had a new coach in John Perron who believed in a lot of us young guys, gave us a lot of opportunity. As I say on whatever date it was, May 15th, and it was a second game of the Stanley Cup Finals, and we're into overtime. What the hell is Brian Skrudland on the ice for starting the overtime when he hasn't even scored a goal yet? However, our line did have, I think we had 12 at that time. McPhee had 5 and Lemieux had 7 or something. So anyway, and the rest is history. 9 seconds is all it took. And
Right.
so it was really, really, really funny how it all evolutionized and worked out for me the way that it did, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously you're doing something right there, and your answer to that was, kind of a hockey answer, meaning that you were putting a lot of the emphasis on your play, and I have no doubt that that had something to do with it. I mean, you do need to be of some level of hockey player, right, to get the attention of your teammates.
You bet.
Um, I find more so in this day and age, it seems like you have to almost be the star player to have the C on your chest, which I don't necessarily agree with. But
Right.
I do think that there's an element that you're probably not talking about, and that's just like the human character element of you. Like there had to be something that you did, something that you embodied that garnered the respect. I mean, you
Well,
said you were a vocal guy.
you were on a bus or two with me
Yeah, I
for
was.
for a few long bus rides. So you knew that we did have a lot of fun during those bus rides. They certainly weren't boring,
Right.
and it wasn't because of the movies that we were watching, but we had a lot of fun. We played a lot of tricks on one another.
Yeah.
I think there were healthy tricks as well. You never wanted to demean a teammate and make them feel that they weren't worthy or wanted, and I think that was one of the things of my character. My parents had brought me up in the idea that, hey, make everybody feel better about themselves, and at the end of the day, you're going to be much stronger. And that's the kind of family I grew up in. So
Yeah. No, that's it. I mean, I love that. I mean, that is, and I think that's the testament of what being an amazing hockey player as well is being able to make your line mates, whoever you're with, be better right on the
right,
ice. I think that's the
you
difference
bet.
between being good and being great. And then if you can do that same thing in the locker room, now you're onto something from a culture
Yeah.
side, right?
Well, do you remember how hard we practiced?
Mm-hmm.
Like I played on a few teams that they didn't know how to practice.
Yeah.
And man alive, that was one thing. And I think that was the reason for our success in Florida. And I learned that in Montreal, continued that on my way to Calgary, Florida, and the rest of the way. And it was just, I mean, practice. You're never going to want to embarrass yourself in front of 18, 19,000 people. So you're always busting your ass in a game, even
Yeah.
though we have seen a few games where that hasn't been the case. Uh, However, in practice, it's all about your teammates. It's all about impressing your teammates and making them work harder and challenging them. And it was sort of funny, but I got here into Calgary as a coach, and I believe it or not, but one of the greatest right wingers of all time, number 12. And when I went up to him one day and I said, "Hey, Jerome, you know what? You got to pick it up a little bit in practice because you got guys that are skating with you, and I know they shouldn't even be close to you. So if you can pick that pace up a little bit, you're going to make them even better because right now they're sticking with you, and that's all they need to do, and they're feeling pretty good about themselves."
Yeah.
And boy, oh boy, when Daryl Sutter came in and really started pushing these guys, I was an assistant coach. You can only do so much at that in that position.
Yeah.
But Daryl came in and I'll tell you, he whipped the boys into shape and practice was hard. And he made it hard. And if it was only 20 minutes, well, it was the hardest 20 minutes you're going to be on the ice for. But
Right.
it was something he was going to get out of you.
Yeah.
And once that was realized, I mean, there they are in the Stanley Cup Finals in 2004. Uh, you know, I mean, it really the proof was in the pudding there.
Right. How did Jerome take that message?
Well, that's the thing about Jerome is, you didn't really want to tell Jerome a lot of things because Jerome did everything right. He was just both on and off the ice. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better human being or a better athlete. And tough as nails and competitive and so didn't take it exactly the way that you might think, but at the same time, he took it and he turned around. And I'll tell you, I truly believe that was a huge, huge change in the Flames and that organization moving forward.
Right. Yeah, there's something to be said, right? When your best player is also your hardest worker and most competitive, like I think you're onto something.
Big time. Big time. And we had a couple of them, Larry Robinson, Bob Gainey. When I first started, I was amazed. And there again, Jason, Bob Gainey taking the time after practice, just working on little flip outs. You know, puck in the corner, we'd put 100 in the or 50 on each side on the dots, just put them in the corner, go get them as quick as we could, turn around and flip them out of the zone. You know, it was little things like that we worked on constantly that made me, and it made me feel so good. Today, those guys don't really have the time to do that. They don't have that extra ice time to fool around. They go from the rink on the ice over to the video or to the gym. You know, it's more or
Yeah.
less 2 hours of really planned stuff. As where before we used to practice, have a little video,
Yeah.
maybe have a meeting, but really practice was practice, and then you're on your way home. So,
Yeah. Lindy Ruff was awesome with that with us in Florida too.
oh,
Us
wasn't
guys
he?
that weren't playing. Yeah, he did a great job with that.
Awesome. He was also a bit of a pain in the ass if your shoes went missing
Yes. Or your pockets got sewn shut or any of those things. Yeah.
or you went in and found some, shaving cream and stuffed in your right front pocket.
Yeah.
Oh,
Uh, you talk about practice, and that is something. I mean, I'm not coaching this year. Well, I did actually coach my a spring team, but I haven't coached a minor hockey team in a couple of years. But I was
yeah.
coaching my boys, and I really enjoyed it. And one of the things that I tried to emphasize, as being the bench boss, was that attention to detail that you're talking about in practice that
Yeah.
you're pushing, right? And I think to me, and even watching now, like as the kids get older, and now I'm able to watch junior camps and I'm able to see kind of the ecosystem of hockey. I think that the competitiveness of practice has drastically changed and what that actually means. Um, I'm not saying that, obviously 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds aren't going to fight in practice, but like in
Right.
junior, that was a thing. I mean, I know in pro it was a thing too.
Sure.
And it was a healthy thing on the healthy teams, right? The
Yeah.
teams that really pushed each other. You're competitive SOBs out there, right? And you're pushing that guy and he's pushing back. And at some point, the wires cross and something happens. It's all good afterwards. You celebrate
Yeah.
it. I'm not saying there needs to be fights in practice, but did you see that, like, from the time that you were involved as a player to the time you were involved as a coach? Like, was there a bit of a separation already happening when it come to the competitiveness in practice?
Oh, yeah. I just, it was all I guess at the end of the day, we didn't rely, for my era of hockey player, we never really truly relied on the coach to set the pace or have to come out and be screaming and yelling and we took it upon ourselves and that was one thing I was really, there were days that you just practice just didn't work out. As I showed up into Dallas and the boys are saying, okay, we screw up in a couple of passing drills early in the practice, and Hitch just blows a whistle and brings us in and tells us to get our heads on ready and be ready for tomorrow because this is BS and this is unacceptable. Get the hell off the ice, have a little bike ride, but that was it.
Yeah.
Well, Keener's in my day one there. We show up and Medano, Neuendijk, and Lettinen are the first three guys to go in a drill. Well, they screw up every pass. So Hitch blows a whistle. I'm thinking, oh, right on, because I got to go find a place to live. This is going to be great. Well, he says, everybody on the goal line. So I said, hang on here a sec. I put my hand up like I was back in elementary school or something. I said, Hitch. Here he goes, what do you want? And he's like, we're just newly arrivals. And I said, well, the boys are telling me that usually you blow the whistle and you send them home. I said, you're not doing this for me, are you? He says, you're skating with Lettinen and Medano. So, they're down back and I'm still halfway going down there. Those guys could skate so good. So anyway, but that team, we knew how to practice. And man alive, that was probably the only time throughout my professional hockey career that I said, okay, this team's going to win a Stanley Cup. And that was 1999. Would have happened in 98 as well if it wasn't for a couple of injuries.
Yeah.
Neuendijk and Medano both went down, but I was really confident in that hockey team.
I believe it. And where does that competitiveness come from, do you think, in practice? You said that it came internally from the boys before. It kind of
Yep.
shifted maybe to be more directed by the coach. Um, I think that probably a culture of winning or having been experienced that in some capacity now breeds that a little bit more. But like, where do you think that comes from? Is it just the people involved essentially, or
It
what?
is. Number 1, well, okay, I'll give you a quick example. Chris Nyland, day 1 of Montreal Canadiens, I think we had 9 rookies to start the season. And, back then it wasn't a 23, or I think it was a 26, 28 man, or was there even a list of how many guys you could have, right? Or a
Right.
number of a
Yeah.
max. So I think there were 9 or 10 of us in that room. Chris Nyland called us all into the video room, more or less threatened us with their lives. First of all, you're the first ones on the ice. You're the last ones off the ice. You're showing up early to tell all those old guys stories of what you did the night before. Like, you got to make it exciting for us, right? So that was part and parcel of being a Montreal Canadian. And Chris said that right off the bat. Larry showed it by example. Bob showed it by example. Rick Green, I mean, Chelios. We had a bunch of guys that really every day they worked their ass off because we knew that would make us better.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a winning culture, but it's also individually. I think that's how some guys, Chris Nyland being on top of that list, not only motivate himself but motivate us to be better as well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I love that when they start to get it. And at the younger ages, it's fun because it is like a little bit of like a light switch. Because I think in this day and age, even with kids, and everyone's taught to be like so nice to each other, right? Like, and there's nothing
Yeah,
wrong with being nice, but it is wrong when you're on the ice and you feel that competing for a puck and knocking somebody over might hurt somebody's feelings, you know.
yeah,
And it's like that's where you can kind of change the rules a little bit and allow them to understand that no, this is actually like you're doing him a favor by knocking him over.
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
like you're
No,
actually bringing the best out of him and making him get up and come at you again. And I think that there's a lot of power in that right now. I mean, for players that do get it, that have that internal fortitude to want to
yeah.
compete, and you get a group of them together on one team, and I think you can be a world beater in this day and age right now with that
Well,
type
they
of
can,
group.
and these kids today, they turn it on and off. I mean, just like a switch. I
Yeah,
don't know if I had that capability. I had it on, right? It was on. I mean, I'm not stretching even beside my brother in warm up because I'd probably want to kill him.
right.
Uh, I mean, that just and to watch that as time went on, it drove me absolutely nuts. So it was something as a coach, and if I wanted to stay in the game, and I eventually became director of player development with the Panthers, I had to change in ways to become better and
Yeah,
realize that these young guys, it's a different era out there, and try and, I guess, accept what they're doing and understand it better so that I could be better at teaching them maybe even some of the old ways as well that I
right.
felt were still really strong and fully in existence in today's society and sport.
Yeah, and relevant, right? I mean, that's the
And
kind of thing
relevant.
that
Yeah, that
I'm
was the word
totally
I was
trying to
looking for.
chat with these guys about that. And I hear you. Okay, so like the whole picture and warm up thing, like that is like now completely accepted. And I know Torts went on a rant a few years ago with like guys chatting before a face
Yeah,
off and all that stuff, right? Like
yeah,
that would fire me up too.
yeah,
But again, like I think it's probably the dinosaur in both of us saying, okay, we have to let some of that go, right? The
right.
game is changing, okay, but there still should be a standard about the expectation of competitiveness, you know, and what compete looks like.
Yeah.
How did you find that line as director of player development? Like, what was your demand or standard for the guys you were working with?
That number one, that they work their asses off, that I never ever once wanted to hear from their coaches or their trainers or anybody that they weren't, you know, or maybe even their teachers or their parents. I mean, as a director of player development, I wanted to know the family. I guess that's where it all started, so that I could really get into the head of that kid and help him out when if times were going to be tough. And hopefully they never were. But at the same time, I was always trying to prepare myself, have that chat with dad, find out what really pushes this kid, and
Mhm.
then have the chat with the kid, not to, just compare the notes of what dad thinks pushes them. And I
Yeah.
mean, I just love that position. And it was fruitful in a lot of ways, fruitful for me and hopefully fruitful for a lot of the hockey players that I helped to get to that next stage as well.
You touch on something there that I think is super interesting, and I believe that that's like as far as high performance is concerned, and like having your players reach their potential. Uh, is the biggest key, and that's the psychology of the player. I think more often than not, most of the guys that come to your table or who got drafted in whatever round, like, how many things do they have to work on a hockey player? Yes, of course, they have to work on their hockey skills in some capacity, right, to get to the pro level. But
Yep.
for the most part, like, they are there. Now it's like, how does the psychology work in that environment to get the most out of them? Where are their pain points? Where are their mental weaknesses? How can you breed that confidence, right, to show up at the
Yep.
proper time and on the biggest stage? It sounds like that's what you're talking about when you're saying, like, get into the head of these guys. Like, how important was that to you to be able to push those buttons?
Very important. And I think what it did as well was built a lot of trust within us. I shared a lot of stuff with them and personal stuff to try and let them know, hey, we're opening up to one another here. This isn't going anywhere else other than you and I. Maybe to your mom and dad, a couple of things. If I feel like they would be helpful. Other than that, it was just building that relationship and building that trust. And if anyone, as I felt strongly, if anyone knew what it was to be a Florida Panther, I
Mhm.
thought I had a pretty good idea of what it was going to take, and especially with what we accomplished there in 3 years,
Mhm.
getting to the Stanley Cup Finals, that was a lot of hard work, and you were part of that. And all these young guys that came in pushed us old guys. I mean, I was near the end of my career, so were a few other fellas, and so we kind of I wasn't Chris Nyland to you, Jason, where I took you into the video room and threatened you with your life, but hopefully I said some good things along the way that because I know you guys, we were really inspired by the young guys. And especially down in Florida. I mean, here we were playing in Miami, for God's sake. We
Yeah.
weren't up in Fort Lauderdale. We went down to Miami. That
Yeah.
was just a hoot and a holler. So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of things where I want to chat with you about there. The the idea of, I mean, I want to backtrack just a little bit. So now you're a captain of 20, you mean 21 or 22 years old. You've won a Calder Cup. You said 6 or 7 guys advanced on. Like, winning, I say that I try and say that to players. I mean, at the younger level, it's hard for them to understand. Once you get to junior, it's even a bit hard to understand because everyone wants to be a first or second line guy or be on the power play. And if they're not, there's this individuality, like they feel, hurt or embarrassed or they're not getting
right.
what they deserve yet. If you are successful on a winning team in whatever role that is, those guys more than often will move on and somebody wants them somewhere else.
You got it.
So can you speak to that a little bit? Like you said, 7 guys from a minor league team end up going to play for an NHL team afterwards. Like, that's because you guys won, and probably no other reason other than that for you, those guys.
100%, 100%. And you brought up something interesting. So we all have a role on a hockey team or on a team. Probably doesn't even matter what sport we're talking about. Everybody has a role. So we all define that role, yet at the same time, we know in hockey or in a lot of these sports, if you get a chance to score, well, if you're not a scorer, we still want you to score. And
Right.
if you're not a checker, well, come playoff time, you've got to be a checker if
Yeah.
we're going to win. So
Yeah.
you're working on those basics right off the bat. And a lot of guys go from junior hockey, they've been the star, they go on to the AHL, NHL, but they've had to adapt. They're no longer that scoring guy. The only way they're going to make this team is if they play two-way hockey. And that was, not that I was a really offensive, big number offensive guy, but I did put up some pretty good points in junior. But I knew if I was going to make the Montreal Canadiens, I wasn't Doug Wickenheiser and I wasn't the other fellas that were in front of me, the Jean Chabots and everybody else.
Mm.
But I knew that if I could play a good, strong two-way game, that I had an opportunity. And man, there wasn't a Saturday night where I didn't watch hockey. I mean, that was just, it's part of the passion, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I tell kids. I said, if you love it and, if you're a center iceman, make sure your favorite hockey player is a center iceman. I don't know why. It just, I've always felt that way, even though I was a center iceman and Bob Gainey and Tremblay were their left and right wingers were
Yeah.
my couple favorite players, and Tony Esposito.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny. I always say, and then you wanted to emulate somebody. There was the other thing of, well, if somebody made it to the NHL, and that guy's name was Brent Sutter back in my day, um, I played against Brent and I thought, man, there's a little bit of similarities in skating style here. I would like to adapt more of his skating style because obviously it's okay. The guy's gone on to a great junior career, won a couple Stanley Cups first couple of years in the NHL. So he was one of the guys that I tried to emulate and go, wow, like I can do this. I think I can do this. And
Right.
so it's just things like that I sort of I was always interested in that type of stuff along the way.
Yeah, student of the game, I guess, right? And
Yep.
looking to get better. Going to take another short break from the conversation with Brian Skrudland to give a shout out to title sponsor of the UMH 68 in BC this year in 2024, Iron Ghost Construction. Iron Ghost Construction is recognized as a top contractor in multiple industries such as oil and gas, forestry, and agriculture. From building turnkey production facilities that produce canola oil, biodiesel, condensate, and oil, to keeping up with the industry changes in forestry where new technology and equipment are replacing that of the past. Iron Ghost specializes in the main structures with a large employment of iron workers, crane operators, and millwrights. Iron Ghost has successfully completed projects in BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. So if you are a producer in oil and gas, forestry, or agriculture and are looking for construction and want a hockey-friendly, a hockey-supportive contractor who knows how to get the job done right, look up Iron Ghost Construction and tell them you heard it on the UMH podcast. Now let's get back to our conversation with Brian Skrudland. When it comes to leadership, and I know that I told you before we started, I want to talk about that. And it just seems so natural for you, you know, and there's a lot of guys that, especially athletes that work with me, that they want to be leaders, right? They want to have a letter on their chest.
Yep.
Maybe it's not quite as natural for them. And, you know, I try and work with them on some of these leadership, you know, attributes. And I think everyone has their own way of leading as well. You know, you said you were a vocal guy. I think a lot of the younger players feel that they have to be vocal to be a captain. I
Right.
tell them that that's a misconception. Some of the
Yep.
best leaders I had weren't vocal. But when you were in that position, just to put the spotlight back on you, were you trying to be a leader or were you just recognized as one? Was there a conscious attempt to be the captain?
Gosh, that's a really interesting question. I think somewhere in the subconscious, it meant something to me, but really for it to be here on the jersey, I had an A on my back, Skrudland, Skrudland. I wish it
Yeah.
was Scrud because then I could have you said C and an A. But it was all by example. If there was one thing my parents told me, you lead by example, and it's sort of like the other thing was, well, you're guilty as those you hang with, type of thing, and so I guess I looked at that leadership thing. I looked at the guys that I really loved as teammates and players. It just was natural. You talk about a Bob Gainey. Well, he always had time for people before, after, during, whatever. Bob would take the time with you, and he was sort of E.F. Hutton. When Bob spoke, you listened. I really enjoyed my time with Bob.
Yeah.
He took Atlanta and I under our wings to start with. We were just married, and we're at his place for Christmas. His wife Kathy. I mean, we had so many good teammates. Lots of dinners and lots of stuff that we did together. So, but there was a lot of it. I think a lot of it just was it was just my character. That's just the way that I was. I was always, uh, I guess when I was younger, I was always trying to be more of the funny guy than I was to be. And then when it came to hockey, man, it wasn't funny anymore. This was serious.
Yeah.
And I even gave a few teammates shit during, I think it was bantam, peewee, midget, laughing in between periods when we were down a goal. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
They
Yeah.
had no cell phone to look at, no jokes, nothing. Anyway, sometimes I was a little too serious as well.
Yeah.
When I look back on it, I probably go, wow, but I think that helped me in the long run
Yeah.
as well. But sometimes
Yeah.
we
No,
can take ourselves too serious. My first year in the minors, I scored on our own net late in the game. It was an over, gave the puck away. I had trouble with that. Man, did I have trouble with that. And a few teammates that I could tell and back then, I mean, your teammates, but at the same time, everybody wants to go up to Montreal. So there is competition from within as well.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, I think those guys are kind of mocking me a little now. So that changed that idea that, hey, no more sulking. You pick your feet up, get your head up and your chin up, and let's get back at her.
Right.
And for those who were laughing, it wasn't a funny matter to me, and I took it very seriously. I took this game very seriously.
Yeah. You know what you did great? I mean, I think is balancing what you just said there of being like you were serious, and when you said something and your tone changed, like people would listen, right?
Right.
Because the other 3/4 of the time you were cracking a joke or making people laugh, right? So I think that was a really interesting composition for you, and why I think that you were such a strong leader in for my young career to see that, and to see that in my first year in the NHL, and the success you guys had, and to see the way you acted in that environment. I thought that was a pretty powerful thing. And you mentioned example. I mean, that's the one thing that I do try and tell players. I'm like, if you can't lead yourself, then you can't lead anybody else.
Right.
So like you have to have your own house in order. And what does that mean? Right. That means preparation. That means your seriousness, your level of attention to detail in practice, how hard you're going to work, like those types of things. And I think that you had that in spades too. So maybe that was something that wasn't necessarily conscious for you, right? That was maybe the character piece, is that every day
Yep.
you came to work and everyone saw that, because that's a difficult thing to do. Come to work
Right.
every single day.
Yeah. And come with a good attitude, and come with the, being prepared. And,
Yeah.
I mean, that held a lot. There was the odd day when I wasn't 100% prepared. We might have stayed out and missed curfew a little bit.
But you'd be the guy that would come though and work your tail off, and I'm sure, and sweat it out, and then, like you said, come
Yep.
with that good attitude, and like still show up though. You know what I mean? Like you're still showing up. And I think that there is such a value to that, because that, I know I'm repeating myself here, but that it's easy to show up on the good days. Everyone
Right.
can show up on the good days, especially
You
as a
bet.
pro, right? But there's going to
Yep.
be a lot of days where you don't feel like it, you don't want to. And then if you still bring it and you're that fountain instead of that drain, boy,
Yep.
like now all of a sudden you're in the conversation as one of the leaders for sure, if you
Right.
can do that.
Yep. You bet. Good point. Well, thanks for
Uh,
that comment.
no, I mean, it's fun. Like I love the reflection, especially, I played 10 years pro, not as many in the NHL as I wanted to, as many games, but I mean, being around a lot of really good pros in different leagues, you have the opportunity to see guys that figured it out kind of, right? Or guys
Right.
that you remember as being good at what they did. And, it's nice to be able to celebrate you and what you did do there, because I think that there was there was something special about that Florida Panther team that year for sure, right?
There
Obviously,
was.
I mean, to do what they did and to get to where you
Sure.
guys got to, a lot of things have to go right, and you having your C on the chest for that whole thing was you. I mean, you were a big piece of it for sure.
Well,
Uh,
thanks.
the one thing I'm going to bring up now that I think of it, now we're at the Florida thing. You might not remember this, but talk about the power, because you guys were an older core, right? For
Yeah.
sure, there was an older core there, and as you already mentioned, there was some of us younger guys coming up, and the one year where I got drafted, this was like after Week C in Washburn, and there were some good
Yep.
guys in those drafts too. But then I was the draft that had Ed Jovanovski, Ryan Johnson,
Rhett,
myself.
Rhett Warner.
Rhett Warner was part of
Yep.
that draft too, right? And those were
Yep.
all like those 4 picks were all in the first 2 rounds, right?
Yeah.
So like
Yep.
some pretty, credible prospects that were coming up and that were,
Big time.
trying to make the show. The funny thing was, and like for me, like the naivety of me at that point was like when you're getting asked questions or in the paper and you're trying to make this team, was like that balance of that. Yeah, if I do show up, that means somebody else is probably leaving. Like you already
Right.
said that, right? I mean, like there
Right.
was a room when you came to Montreal because some of these older guys were leaving.
Yeah.
And I was quoted in the paper as saying, "Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It looks like there's maybe a changing of the guard that's happening," or something along those lines. And
That's called confidence.
well, and stupidity kind of too, right? Like, and not really even really understanding that aspect of the game. And I remember showing up to practice the next day and didn't even remember that I said it, like zero consequence to me.
Right.
And obviously you guys had read it, right? It was in the Florida, whatever. And
Yep.
and I think it was Pi, as I came through like the dressing room door, like saluted me, right? You guys were saluting me. And I had no idea why I
I
didn't
knew I
get it,
was going to
right?
apologize for something today.
No, no, but it was beautiful. Like it was kind of in your style, right? Like there was a seriousness to it,
Yep.
right? There was a
Yeah.
seriousness to
Yeah.
it.
We were sending a message, and
Yeah, you sent a message, but it was in a I mean, it was in a constructive way that had some humor to it.
yep.
And the message was sent. I mean, it wasn't like you pulled me aside and really had a but then I was like, "Oh my God, like that was so dumb and so disrespectful, really." I mean, to say that. And but anyway, so do you remember that at all? Probably not, eh? Like
Man, as since you've phoned me,
yeah.
it's amazing how that brain goes back into, like, it's crazy some of this
Yeah.
stuff. Like, okay, Greensboro, North Carolina. Were you at that training camp?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was that year 2? I think that would have been 90, like, gee whiz, no, because you're saying 95, 90, 94, 95 was your draft year?
94 no, well, 94 was my draft year, and I almost made the team the second year. I was the last guy
Yeah.
cut, and I think
Yes.
that would have been the year probably the second year
Was
because
that
I
was
stuck
that
around.
Greensboro?
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
was the one.
So we're on our way to training camp. Well, we're there. We're all in our own vehicles, or I forget exactly. Well, I knew I had my own vehicle and a couple of guys with me, but I'm driving by the Hooters in Greensboro, North Carolina. There's a great big sign up, bikini contest, 7 till 9 p.m., blah, blah, blah. Well, my car just pulls right in there, right? And this is at 8:30 in the morning. Anyway, I said, "So is anybody here that's in charge of that bikini contest tonight?" And the gal comes out and says, "I am." I said, "Well, my name's Brian Skrudland. I'm with the Florida Panthers hockey club." And I said, "We've got 30 young guys, and you've never seen 30 better looking young guys in their tight little underwear in your life than what you'll see tonight if they can all come on stage." So that's how I set that up that morning. And then I think there were only 5 or 6 of you that went out. But it was, I mean, and everybody put on their favorite dill pickle underwear or whatever you guys had, in your wardrobe back then. But, you know, I guess that was part of when you talk about the mental part of the game, or building character, building team. My brain was always on overdrive for that sort of stuff because I always wanted to be doing something with the whole team.
Yeah.
Lanny used to get so mad at when we come off a 21-day road trip, and I'd say, "Well, we're all getting together tomorrow night." She'd go, "No, you're not." It's like, "Yeah, we have to." And I said, "We've been away for 3 weeks, honey. We got to get down to our favorite tavern here in Florida." So, but that sort of stuff, I just don't forget that sort of stuff. We had so much fun with it,
Yeah.
and the young guys had so much fun. So that was our rookie initiation that year, I think.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
all
it
we did
was.
was that. It was kind of fun.
And
And you
that's the
guys,
thing, like
I know for a fact, there were at least 10 beautiful women in the back there that you were all changing with, which you all thanked me for at the end of it also. That was kind
hey,
of funny too.
all I know is that I won. So, you know what I mean? Like let's just leave it at
Those
that.
That was the dill pickle underwear I was talking about.
Oh, but you know what? Like that's actually interesting because like again, the hazing and all the bullshit that people, I mean, that some of these stories that have come out, I was never a part of anything like that. I was never in a team like that, thank gosh.
Yeah,
Um, so never had that aspect of it. But the stuff that
right.
I was involved with, like getting changed in the bathroom on a bus or whatever, right? Like
Yeah,
that rookie thing,
yeah,
you're all go in there buck naked with the clothes. Like that would be taboo now today and probably shouldn't be
sure.
done. But like those types of things and the thing you talked about, you mean being in your underwear in front of a bunch of people, on stage, like there is a mental, like it's uncomfortable,
Right,
right? Like it's uncomfortable.
sure.
There's a level of resiliency and mental toughness that has to go along with that. You also have this requirement of like team responsibility. At least I
Yep,
felt that, right? Like
yep,
the older guys want me to do this, which for me, I thought was all like, I think it's healthy. Like, I think that there's a piece of that that like bonds it. I think that's a piece of that that like, I don't know, galvanizes. I don't know what the right word is, but like there needs to be a level, like an entry level. Like there needs to be some type of a creed or some type of a, I don't know. Like,
Well,
do you know what I'm saying?
the
Like, I
guys are
think if there's
getting a
none of
little
that,
more
like it's not good either.
yeah, well, and the guys are getting a little more creative today. Or
Yeah.
at least I've heard some stories of some stuff that they're doing, which
Yeah.
I think is kind of neat. I mean, we all watched when Pittsburgh was on their run, winning the Stanley Cups, and Fleury and all those guys were always doing something to some teammate's room, or that.
Yeah.
I mean, that was sort of fun.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
Russ Portnell cutting the armpits out of Gerald Diddick's in Montreal, Gerald Diddick's uh, uh, dress shirt, but they were also yellow from here to here. It was time for them to go, and Gerald knew that, so there was there was no hurt that went that way. But
Yeah.
then Russ always wore the nicest shirts in the world. And Gerald didn't want to cut his armpits out and get even because Gerald's was for the garbage, but he took every one of Russ's beautiful buttons off of his shirt. So after the game, of course, now Russ is just out with his shirt wide open and no
Oh, Russ
buttons.
loved that.
So, this sort of stuff we had so much fun with. I did
Yeah.
have one instance, so if I may share with you. Mine was the worst. I told my mom and dad when I got home, I dropped my pants, took my shirt off. I stood there in my underwear, even though if I was to take it off, there was more damage there than like it was just I was bleeding all over, and it was terrible. And I said, I will never ever initiate anybody. I don't care. Blah blah. Well, it was a year later, and we get this young rookie by the name of Joey Kosher. He
Oh,
comes into Saskatoon, and he was a pretty confident young guy, but now they got him on the table. He's blindfolded the whole bit, and I'm going, oh man, like Coach will kill all of us when this is all said and done. But I thought he was just a little too cocky and too big for his bridges right now. So I went in, I took the blindfold off. He says, screw you, I'm going to kill you. And I said, I'm just taking half of your eyebrow. And every day you look in the mirror, I want you to realize, don't be so cocky. Come in here and just be one of us. You don't have to be the king every single day. And so anyway, he says, you touch me, I'll kill you. I said, well, I'm just taking half the eyebrow. So anyway, took half the eyebrow, put the blindfolds back on. The other guys did what they were doing, whatever. He came in the next day, give me a wink. I thought, oh, game on. I better be ready. And I got a good sleep the night before because I figured for sure he's coming. Anyway, it goes to 4 years later, and I'm with Montreal. He's in Detroit. We're in the offensive zone taking a face off, and I hear screwy, screwy. And I look over, and there's Joe. He's got his glove under his arm. He's going like this to me, eyebrow, half an eyebrow. Well, I won the face-off back to our defenseman. I was off the ice before the puck even got to the defenseman. That's what I tell people. So, and Kosher says I've never heard that story until last year. We had a fundraiser that we were doing together. So,
that's
but
funny.
that 100% true story. It was funny as hell. Yeah.
So
And the
what
boys,
do you think he
the
would have
boys
taken
on
if he
the ice,
wanted a piece off you?
well, and the boys on the ice, of course, are going, "What the hell, coach? What's this?" So he had to tell the story. Yeah, but just
Yeah,
a great
that's wild.
teammate.
That happened. Yeah, I mean I don't know. I mean that whole thing happened to me, and that was the worst thing that happened to me. It was in junior in Penticton, and like naked on the dressing room floor, strung out. But they never did anything though. But like that was like even that though, right? Like that would
Yeah,
not get good press today at
right.
all. Like
No,
being
no,
like that,
no.
having the blindfold on, being
Yeah,
super exposed and vulnerable. Like
yeah,
that was the worst thing that happened. And it wasn't, I mean, whatever. I guess we're from a different era. Like that in of itself shouldn't happen. But there was something about that too that I left actually feeling more confident in some weird way. You know what I mean? That I was able to like do that or
yeah.
whatever. So I don't know, but
Well, for me to even go to the rink the day after it happened to me, I was pretty impressed with myself because I thought, oh, and not only that, but I was playing junior football at my high school back then.
all right.
So I had to go into the gym and I'm baldered in a popcorn fart all over the place. And nothing's changed there, but still, it was like, my good Lord. So hockey,
Yeah,
kids,
hockey, right?
boys will be boys
Yeah, and it's growing. I mean, it's evolving, and I think it has. I mean, in a lot of
in a
good
big way.
ways, for sure. And
Yep. Thank God.
and yeah, exactly, exactly. With that Florida team. So I mean, I don't want to fast forward past your Montreal Canadiens. 'Cause I mean, as a first year to win that is super cool. But I think that there is a different perspective, obviously, after one right and having now an NHL career and now getting back on an expansion league team with a C on your chest and to experience that run again, mind you, I mean, obviously didn't win, but like what a crazy, crazy ride that was. What was special about that team? I mean, I said it was special, but what to you was special about that team that made you guys be as successful as you were?
Well, it was no secret that when Bobby Clark, Roger Nielsen, that coaching staff, the management team all got together and selected each and every one of those individuals that started that season, or just in the expansion draft. I looked at that list and I thought, wow, I hate all these guys. So I knew right off the hop that we were going to be a competitive team. And
Right.
it started day one at training camp. We had a hoot and a holler that summer just to get things going
Yeah.
in Florida, which
Yeah.
really, I mean, that just got us all just so excited. What a place to want to play hockey.
Yeah.
And I mean, we had a couple of young kids at the time, so hey, we might not even have to put a snowsuit on this winter. I mean, there's a bonus for the misses.
Yeah.
So, and that was another thing we really looked at. But it's just ultra competitive, super fun. Roger Nielsen made coming to the rink every day a joy, an absolute joy, as much as we already did as players.
Yeah.
Bobby Clark, reputation stood for itself. And Bobby, from day one, never forget that first comment, but it was like, hey, we're all NHL players, just like every other team. So why can't we win right now? You've all played, you've all played on good teams, you all have a new start. Why can't we win right now?
Yeah.
And there's no reason why we shouldn't. And it was, I think it was that. And then Clarky was gone. He called me up and halfway through this, well, I guess it wasn't even halfway through the season, but he told me, can we meet for a coffee? We did. He was our general manager. He says, "Listen, I got a chance to go back to Philadelphia. I'm taking it." And I actually told him, "You're going to regret this." And sure as shit, we beat him in '96.
Yeah.
And he came into our dressing room after we beat the Flyers and congratulated each and every one of us on what we were doing and
Yeah.
asked me to come outside the room for a second. He says, "You're a man of your word." And I said, "Geez, you still remember that?" I was only just praying to God I was going to be right, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it was just, man. And Wayne Huizenga, I mean, you couldn't ask for a better owner, to be
Yeah.
honest. I mean, this guy was just, he was on the sidelines of everything, but he was front row center, and we just loved him to death. Each and every one of us guys got a chance to rub shoulders with the owner and get to know him a little bit. And
Yeah.
he was just such a nice person. And his
He
wife
was.
Marnie treated our wives like gold. It was just a beautiful situation.
That matters too. I think it really
It sure
matters.
does.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
sure
that
does.
matters a lot.
And I
Obviously,
think
it doesn't hurt when
The Viola family's probably doing that now
yeah.
and
Yeah.
taking over for the Huizenga family, and there they are with their Stanley Cup. So
Yeah,
couldn't be more
exactly.
excited for them. Yep.
How, I wanna just get touch on, I mean, obviously, Beezer was a huge part of that run, like his personal success, right? He caught fire at a great time for everybody, and
Awesome.
he was, to knock out Pittsburgh that year and Mario Lemieux and, everything else that had to go on there with the juggernaut that they had.
Yep.
A lot of things were going right. Beezer himself, though, was such an interesting guy to me
Yep.
because he was in again, there's 20 personalities in a room, right? Like Brian Skrudland and John Van Beesbrook are both pros in their own way, but they're very, very different, right?
Yep.
And his
Yep.
approach to the game was one that was quite intimidating as a young guy, especially his
Right.
approach on game day. Uh,
Yep.
just maybe talk about that, like your experience with, like, I mean, different personalities in the locker room and how it takes, different people to come together and the respect required, in respecting other guys' preparation or the way they are.
Well, that's a huge part of it, and you use the right word, respect. You gotta acknowledge, respect what they're doing. If it works for them, well, hey. And if you don't have something that's working, well, have a look around and see what all these guys do. I mean, hockey's a very superstitious sport, as well, as you very well know.
Yeah.
Some guys, what the hell is he doing that for again? But he's got to go over that line 5 times, or he's got to, scratch his head 4 times before he goes into the face-off circle. It's crazy. So,
Yeah.
but we had an immense amount of respect for one another and our families. We tried to do a lot of stuff together as families. Um, and I think it just went a long way for understanding what each and every player was, and if they did it that way, you didn't get in their way,
Right.
unless, of course, as we found out 2 months into the first season, Roger Nielsen comes into the room and says, "Okay, last night's game was absolutely terrible. 6 guys went golfing yesterday, or not yesterday, the day before. So, those 6 guys know who they are, and I don't think 5 of those guys played worth a shit. So, you guys have to police yourselves whether you're gonna be golfing or playing hockey this year." Well, we had a couple guys that loved golf, right? As soon as practice was over, it was right to the golf course.
Yeah.
Well, they realized they could not play the day before a game, and they made that sacrifice, as they should have, rightfully
Yeah.
so, for their job. Yet at the same time, you know, there was no fooling around. Those guys were making the sacrifice. They weren't going to be the weak cog in the link. This was just going to we're going to make that chain as strong as we possibly could.
Yeah.
And Roger had a lot to do with that. As much as Doug McLean came in, but Roger had a lot to do with that. He planted a lot of great seeds, and for a lot of young players, he was very supportive. I mean, they called him Captain Video, but man, I could watch his videos all day long. He made them fun.
Yeah. That's cool. When it came to just getting back to Beezer, like he was super serious, right?
Yes.
Like didn't want to socialize. I mean, I didn't go near him on game day. Was that the same way for you guys? Like in the room there, did you give
Yeah.
him his space too? Was that just the way you handled it?
Yeah. That was just the way he was. John was, Jason, goalies are different. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't care what anybody says. We've always said it. But they do. They've got their own preparations, and it is a position all by itself. I mean, as much as they're part of the team, they are the last line of defense, and without John, we don't have that story.
Yeah.
Let's face it. I mean, you just bring up Mario and Jagger and the Penguins, but to start off with, it was Bork and Neely and the Bruins,
Yeah.
and then it went to Eric and the Legion of Doom with the Flyers, and then we got Mario and then they decide to bring in the dehumidifiers into South Florida and make our ice the best ice in the NHL for Forsberg and Sakic. I said, no, put the ice chunks back out there, make them work through it. Anyway, that's
Yeah. No, good
it
point.
was understandable that 4 game sweep, but we pushed one another. Yet at the same time, I always had a little bit of fun with Beezer. I was one guy I think that could, every
Get
now
away
and
with
then
it.
throw one at him and get away
Yeah.
with it. But
Yeah.
really, I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. The as far as being like that separation or from preparation, I think is one of the biggest differences from junior ranks to even maybe AHL to NHL regular. The consistency required at the pro level, right, to bring a game that's best in the league worthy.
Yeah.
How did you find that preparation? Like, did it come with you inherently, or was it things you had to find out as you became a pro and entrenched in the game that like became part of you and things you knew you had to do?
Well, it was the nutrition side of it has never changed. My wife was a wonderful cook, still is. The rest the night before the game was so important to me. And then my pregame naps were really important. And Lana will tell you how important they were because we had water running down the inside of the walls one afternoon. And I said, honey, I'll get at it tomorrow. Just let her run. I got a big game tonight. She wasn't very impressed with my response, but
Yeah.
that's just, I mean, and she was so supportive. I mean, there's another thing. You're going to get married to somebody. Well, I couldn't have asked for better support. And this was a gal that I'd loved since I was 13 years of age. And here we were now playing pro hockey and raising a family and living all by ourselves out in Montreal or Dallas or Florida and loving every minute of it and just totally supporting each other on because we had a pretty important team at home as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. That matters. Uh, Maybe we'll finish on the last one. So, I mean, we talked about being a winner. You mean you step into the league, you win a Stanley Cup, you play for a good, like a historic Montreal Canadiens team. You end up going to Florida, getting to the final, wearing the C again. Do you think that you get that opportunity in Dallas without those things on your resume?
Probably not. And even then, I felt like I was so fortunate. I got was at the right place at the right time a number of years. The situation in Dallas was really interesting because now I got Bob Gainey as the general manager, Doug Jarvis as an assistant coach, Montreal Canadiens, Craig Ludwig as an ex-teammate, Guy Carbonneau as an ex-teammate, Joe Nieuwendyk, who I played a short period of time with in Calgary, and then Keener and I went from Mike Keenan and I went
Right.
from New York to Dallas. So there was a lot of familiarity there. And the idea of how good they were, just now seeing some of these guys live every single day. Sergei Zubov, maybe one of the most talented players that I ever played with. Just the nicest set of hands that I've ever had the opportunity to see on a daily basis.
Right.
And just as cool as a cucumber. And then, of course, Modano, where that sweater flies up, and it's just, and then Letton, and you can go on. Our defense was as strong as any six defensemen in maybe the history of the National Hockey League, for gosh sake. I mean, those guys were good. And then Eddie in the pipes, and if Eddie wasn't going, you had Roman Turk. So we were pretty strong from our first line right through to our fourth line. So
why did
lot
they?
of fun.
But yeah, so put that, so put the GM cap on. Like, so you have all these guys that you just talked about, and then
Yep.
you and Mike Keane get added to that recipe. So
Yep.
when you get in there, what is the message to you, or why do you think you're there, and what are you providing as for value to that group?
Well, as I showed up, I think it was 4 days, 5 days after becoming a Dallas Star, and I showed up and there was a little envelope in my stall. I should go grab it so I can read you exactly. But anyway, I read the Bobism, and I call it a Bobism because it was from Bob Gainey. But it was just 3 little pointers: strong on faceoffs, hard to play against, and keep the room light. you know,
Good. Yeah.
hey, but you realize, man alive, with this group, those are 3 really important things. And maybe keeping the room light was maybe one of the most important things. I mean, I was having fun right through to the last that last warm up going into, was it double overtime in Buffalo? Holly scored. Anyway, it was like we were having fun. We were just having fun. And as tense as some of those guys were, especially Eddie Belfour, I mean, if you can still laugh, and because you're going to go out there and do your best, but still, we still enjoyed the game, and we enjoyed practices. We enjoyed just working for each other, and so, but that opportunity definitely came from the past relationship with Bob. He sent Craig Button out to do the scouting prior to the trade, and I've had numerous conversations with Craig. But he said, no, we just felt you and Mike in a trade for Doug Harvey and Pittsburgh Penguin now. His name will come to me, but we just felt like that was a bit of an upgrade for us. And I thought, wow, well, when people do that and sort of let you know that message as well, man alive, you put a little bit extra on the backpack and you say, I'm going to go the extra mile for you guys because you have for me. And I thought, number one, that accounting had screwed up on my first check when I arrived in Dallas, because all of a sudden I got a 9% pay raise, but there's no state tax. I'm coming from New York. I went, whoa, hang on here a second. Nice little bonus. So that was sweet as well.
No, that's great, and I'm so pumped that you mentioned that note from Bob, because again, 3 points to an NHL player of how to provide value to a group, and one of them has nothing to do with being on the ice at all.
Right.
Like, that is I mean, that's the message that I try and get through to guys about the difference between, sometimes even making it, let alone, or maybe adding years to your career, is like that piece right there, that the game and the group is as big, if not bigger than you as an individual. And if you get that aspect of it, like you're maximizing your own potential and your own tenure, but you're also making other people better, and you're making the game a better place, and you're having more fun while you're doing it. Like there's so many wins on there. And I just think when we're trying to be great sometimes as an individual, we can get so stuck inside ourselves that we
Mm.
forget about that aspect, right? About the guys around us and about the culture of the whole thing. So I just love that you said that. I mean, that's a decision being made to try and win a Stanley Cup, to bring someone in that's going to provide that type of lube, that oil in the room, like right, that they knew that you were going to bring. Like I love that story. Thanks for sharing
Yeah,
that.
we just had so much fun. I know, and I mean, I look back our relationship with Bob, and I just can't thank him enough for allowing us that opportunity because Keener and I, to be honest, I think I can speak for Mike, but we were really disappointed. Here we are playing with the greatest player ever to play in the world, Wayne Gretzky, and we're probably not going to make the playoffs. Like this was just absolutely really ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And we just couldn't find anything, couldn't find that chemistry in New York. But anyway, we found it in Dallas, and 3 years of thrills.
Yeah, that's what a way to go out too. So two
Yeah.
cups. I know you've probably been asked that question a ton of times. Is there one highlight for you, over your career that really stands out? Maybe like your personal proudest moment?
Well, I gotta admit, it only took 9 seconds, but to chip in for my first goal of the '86 playoffs, and for it to be an overtime goal. I mean, it's probably the one thing that will stick with me for I don't know how many more years. I mean, we're going on quite a while now. I
Yeah,
actually brought I said to Lana a while back, I said, you got to come watch this Vancouver Boston. So it would have been 2012 where
yeah,
Burroughs scored, I think, 11 seconds into the overtime.
yeah,
But for
yeah.
some reason, I just felt like this was going to be it. Now, if he would have shot the puck before wrapping it around, he would have probably been 7 seconds. So it's not like it can't be broken, and especially with the way they're moving today. But anyway, it's been, I always have a little fun with it. I say Lana always says that I scored that goal in 9 seconds, and we had three of our kids in 27 seconds. So
Oh man, that's awesome. Well, I said an hour and we're at an hour and 20, so I think I'll let you go. But I really appreciate you. I really appreciate the message you bring. One thing I say, Screwy, is better humans make better hockey players. Like that's one thing that I really truly believe, and I think
awesome.
when we can build that, that character piece, the human piece, the teammate piece, like you are going to be a better as an individual, and you're also going to make those guys around you better. So, and I think that you exemplified that your entire career from the short time I was with you. I thought you did a great job of that, and thanks for sharing that message here today. I
Thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much. Appreciate that.
Awesome. Is there anything else you'd want to leave my listeners with as far as message for how to get to where they want to go?
Well, I would say that you've got some great points that you keep bringing up. So as you get your guests, keep pushing them into those areas that they can share some of the inside stuff because I always knew my work hat had to go on first before my skates. That was one thing that I knew for a fact. And you can never be under over prepared. I
Right.
think to be over prepared, even public speaking, some of these deals that I do today, when I go in and I'm well prepared, man, they're just wonderful to do. And you don't feel like, you're not getting all
Yeah.
sweaty and anxious for all that stuff. It's just kind of rolls
Mhm.
off your tongue now. So
Yeah.
anyway, it's
No,
been a lot of fun.
that's great. Those are great messages. Well, thanks again. Next time I'm in Calgary, I'm going to look you up.
Peace.
We'll have to share a few more stories. And I really appreciate you taking the time today, Screwy.
Great to see you, Jason. All the
Right.
best.
All right. Thank you so much for being here till the end and listening to the conversation with Brian Skrudland, two-time Stanley Cup champion and my former captain. Screwy was always a ton of fun to be around. Always pulling some type of prank or getting the guys together for some type of a getaway or a lunch or a dinner, or like he said, the bikini contest at Hooters in Greensboro as my rookie initiation one of the years. There was always something up his sleeve, and he kept things light. He kept things fun, but he kept it professional. He knew how to work, and he was an example in that capacity, and wore the C with pride, and he deserved it. a ton. So tons of lessons to take away from Mr. Skrudland. I wish we could have him on a little longer. There's so many more questions I thought of asking after we were finished, but maybe that's for another time. For all of you who out there who want to be leaders, I did say it during the discussion, but finding your authentic voice, like what you are, first and foremost as a person, is integral to being a good captain. You can't pretend to be a captain. You can't pretend to be an idea of somebody that you aren't, and think that that's going to get the troops, get your teammates fired up and have them rally against you. Leadership is a skill. There are things that you can do to become a better leader. You can practice being more vocal. If you think vocality is something that you aren't great at and you want to be more vocal because you think that a leader should be vocal and a good communicator, then practice it. You can definitely practice these things so you become authentic at it. It's not like you can't ever be good at it, but don't fake it in the locker room on day one and try and tell this great big speech and feel like you have to be some type of an orator, communicator, and you're going to gain the trust of your teammates and you're going to be deemed, the leader of the team. That's not the way it works. The way it works is you show up authentically you. If you're a jokester, be a jokester. If you're a serious guy, be serious. If you are somebody who likes to have a good time and poke fun of himself, do that. But make sure you bring your standard to the table, and your standards have to be high. That's a non-negotiable, especially once you get to the pro ranks, and most of the time at the junior ranks. Your character has to be high. What does character mean? That means you have to make other people around you better. It means you have to make them feel comfortable. It means you have to do the right thing much more often than not, and when no one's looking. It means you should be one of the hardest workers in the room, if not the hardest worker. It means that your preparation is detailed and meticulous and consistent. It means you bring a level of play that people understand who you are and what you're going to bring every night. Winning is paramount to you if you are an authentic leader of a hockey team. That has to be the most important thing, and getting the best out of everybody around you has to be important. So many things get lost in the idea of what a captain is. You can be a quiet captain, a loud captain. You can be a competitive physical captain. You can be a dangler as a captain. But you do need to be you, and you do need to be an example when it comes to those who are around you. And the one that never misses is going to work. Like Brian Skrudland says, you put your hard hat on before you put your skates on. Whether you're a first PP guy or a third line centerman, you put your hard hat on first, whether it comes to going to the gym, whether it comes to preparing for an exhibition game or a playoff game. Show that work ethic, show that compete on a night in, night out basis. Be relentless about it, and you will be looked up to on your team, because that is something that is very difficult to do, and leaders are good at doing difficult things. And don't forget about that interpersonal aspect of leadership. Those around you should feel included, should feel welcomed, should feel valued. And they should also feel challenged by a captain. That's one of the things that a captain should be doing, should be challenging those around them to be better. Not only by their example, but also sometimes in a challenge of words, that this needs to be better. That obviously comes at a little later ages. I'm not expecting U13 and U15 captains out there to be holding his teammates accountable. Let the coaches do that. But once we get to the older levels, the pros and the juniors that are listening to this, that is something that comes. There's a responsibility to leadership that you need to be comfortable in calling guys out around you. And you only get to do that when you're bringing it yourself. So leadership lessons from Brian Skrudland. Such good stuff there. Better humans make better hockey players, as you know. Keep trying to be a better human. Your hockey will follow. Till next time, play hard and keep your head up.